Welcome to Love in the Wild, the podcast where healing gets real, dating can be complicated, and self-love is the main character energy we're all here for. I'm your host, Katelyn and recovering people pleaser, expert red flag spotter, and your personal cheerleader through every glow up, breakdown, and late night overthinking spiral. Every week, we're diving into love, heartbreak, boundaries, and the wild ride of becoming that girl. Healed, happy, and unbothered. So grab your matcha, your journal, or just your AirPods, because around here, we don't chase love, we become it. As parents, we spend so much time teaching our kids to say please and thank you, but how often do we teach them that their voice matters, that they can say no, and that healthy relationships include understanding their own boundaries? Today's guest is Tiffany Braxton, creator of Consent Comics, an educational comic book that helps people understand consent is not as complicated or intimidating as we used to think. It's a natural everyday practice rooted in respect. This groundbreaking, universally appealing comic transforms the way people of all ages understand consent, boundaries, and personal power. With a voice that is both disarming and deeply impactful, Tiffany brings a compassion to topics that are often misunderstood or challenging to discuss. As a mom, I'm especially excited for this conversation because these lessons don't just help our children navigate relationships, they help build confidence, trust themselves, and understand that their feelings and boundaries deserve to be respected. Tiffany, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about you. Tell us why you started Consent Comics. That is a tongue twister.
Yeah. I think I'm just used to saying it. Consent comics, consent comics, consent comics. But you're right. If you say it a few times, you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I
But
love it.
yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Very happy to be here. Just the topic of parenting, honestly feel humbled. Just that someone might take what I'm saying and put it into their household. I truly respect homes and families, and so thank you for having me. Thank you for having me on this topic, and thank you to those out there who will take some of this and say, you know what, she's cool enough that I'm gonna implement this in my family. But my journey really started as a survivor. I was on the other end of things that we're talking about. We're talking about, instilling these things in our kids so that they can avoid, the route that I took and the route that really a lot of us take in the dating world. You don't have to be even a quote unquote survivor to feel like you've survived the muck that is, the dating swamp. But I for sure, I came to where I said, okay, how did I get here? How did I get here? And what do I wish I had known along the way? And for me, that led me to, this was before Chat GPT was a thing. So I was Googling and I was like, okay, what am I missing here? What am I missing in terms of understanding my journey, understanding where I'm at, understanding my feelings, and really just how could this have maybe been prevented? And so I came across consent. And for me, that was really the only time I ran into consent before that was, at the doctor's office where you're signing the I consent to you doing this to me. And, if something goes wrong, it's not on you, that kind of paperwork.
Yes.
That was the only thing that I had run into consent with. Where we were using that word. And so, applying it to what I had experienced and especially the abuse that I experienced and specifically the sexual abuse, that was new to me. It was new to me to even think about, and I'll never forget this sentence because it was life changing. But on this website in particular, it said any unwanted sexual touch was sexual assault. And I was like, is it really that simple? Because if it's really that simple and, I understand even some of you, if you just heard that sentence, you might be thinking back about some different things that happened to you, but it really hit me to where I was like, oh my gosh, I've been through a lot of this and I just didn't know how to respond. Not that it was my responsibility, because one of the things I always go back to is if you want to do something, it's really on you to make sure the other person wants to do it. Right. And
Yep.
so, no shame, no blame. But it was really important for me to see okay, all those things that I thought I just needed to kind of push to the side and ignore and not think was a big deal. They were all culminating to a bigger deal.
Right.
And no wonder I was where I was when I had, like, I still work through it, but, like, I was newly diagnosed with complex PTSD at the time, and, if you know, you know, but it is really hard to go through, complex PTSD in the sense of it's not just one thing that happened to you. You are really trying to make sense of, like, all of these things, and it's really overwhelming, and a lot of times you have repressed memories, which I did as well, and I was an absolute mess. I was like 40 pounds lighter than I am now, so I could see my bones. I remember getting on the scale and I was like scared of the number that I saw. And my
Wow.
poor parents were just trying to keep me going. And so, I was in the point where I was like, I don't know how much I'm going to get through this, but I want to try and make sure other people don't have to go through this. And so that's really what birthed like Consent Comics. And I said, you know, all this stuff is really great, but unless you're looking for it, you're not really going to find it a lot of times. I think consent teaching usually attracts those who are looking for consent teaching. And so I was trying to create something that would, almost trick people into being like, oh, what's that? And, I just came up with the idea of comics because I realized like, it kind of came randomly. And then I was like, yes, that makes sense because even growing up, my parents would get this Sunday newspaper and all I would do is I'd go through the whole thing and I'd look for that little comics section, for those of you who like are from that day and age of like the newspaper, Paperboy, even the game, like where it made sense. Now people would be like, what is this kid on a bike? Why is he throwing papers at the door? But when if you lived in that time, you understand, like, comics is just like even then, like the little black and white comics, it didn't matter what the story was about. You were interested in seeing
Yes.
what is happening with these people and these words in the bubble and these facial expressions. And so that's really what I was trying to go for. Like, how can I almost trick people into being into something that they really need to be into? And I mean, really, that's also like the teacher in me because I do have a teaching background.
Okay.
And a lot of teaching is tricking kids to be into something, and the trick turns out to be, not so much a trick because they're like, oh, I am actually interested in it. But you really have to kind of like, oh, okay, let's go at it this way. And they're like, oh, this is actually interesting. So, really that's like where Consent Comics came from was, me needing to heal and me needing to do something about what I had been through.
Your story is super touching, and I'm, excited to learn more. To your point, like that's kind of how this podcast came about is
Mm,
I have always kind of like worn my heart on my sleeve
yeah,
and, talking about your PTSD of like it's very much like what has happened to you and what your brain has taught you. And I'm not
yeah,
a psychologist, so there's probably a proper term for it, but then it's coming into the middle and like almost like rewiring your brain to say
exactly.
like, "No, that actually wasn't okay." But
Hmm.
your brain has just taught you like, "Nope, it's okay." You suppress it, you do whatever to kind of it
Yeah,
protects you. And that's why I started this podcast. I was like, I truly need to like heal out loud
mm,
with this and the things that are going on in my life. And the only way I was going to do it really was if I'm helping other people. So I was like, if
yeah,
I
I love
can
that.
help other people through this and through my own story, that's how I started this podcast. And
Yeah,
it really is rewiring your brain. It's that one moment that you get where you know something wasn't right, but
yeah,
then, like what you said, you read something and it triggered something in your brain where
exactly.
you're like, "What?" And your brain is like, "No, it's okay." And you're like, "No,
Mhm.
it's not." Like, I'm reading it here. And so your logic kicks in and you're like,
Yeah,
but my brain is telling me something else, and so you're rewiring it, and it makes me think, like, what are just some ways that parents are kind of unintentionally teaching children to ignore their own feelings and instincts?
mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times, one, we as parents, we get so busy. We were just talking about it before, like, the busyness is real, right? It's just like, we're always juggling so many things, and I think because of that, we sometimes forget to juggle the most important things, which, can be our children and their feelings and making sure that they feel seen and heard. A lot of times within our stories, that's what was missing. Whether it was with our own parents or whether it was on our dating journey, how many times did you feel like you were disappearing and that whatever you were saying, your voice just didn't matter and you were becoming more and more mute, right?
Mhm.
And so anytime that we can speak to our children in a way where they feel like, oh my gosh, like my mom, my dad, whatever trusted adult that I have in my life is seeing me, is loving me like no matter what in this moment, is not trying to even like fix me, but just be there for me and support me. I think that's one of the best things we can do. So, like, in the busyness, just really practicing, and I know that we don't even do this for ourselves a lot of times, right? But just practicing the pause, pause and
Mhm.
think, like, what is really happening around me? What is happening in me? And teaching our kids to do that same kind of pause as well. Like, let's pause here and really, like, be in this moment, even though all of those other moments are calling our attention too, right? So I think our just our busyness, and I say that in a way of like, this is me too. This
Yeah.
is not just, me saying like this as an expert that where I do this all the time and I always like have my kids pause, but really kind of like pausing and listening to their feelings and, obviously validating them, not trying to change them, just guiding them rather than just trying to force them to be what it is that we think they need to be in that moment.
Mm. That's really good 'cause it's teaching them, like, longer life lessons,
Mhm.
when they start getting jobs and they start
Yeah.
having stressful days and they start getting into situations where we're not, because as moms, we wanna protect them all the time, but
Yeah.
the reality of it is they get farther and farther away from us before they start coming back.
Yeah. 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 I mean, and just like you said, even the protection part, I had to realized that even, as I was like even reading my comics and working on them, I realized something that even within myself I was doing as a parent, which I didn't realize, until I saw it, in someone else. And I was like, ooh, that's kind of like tricky and manipulative. But really, it was like, a lot of times we manipulate our kids without even realizing it.
Mm.
And, I know that's gonna be like, "Wait, what? I'm not a manipulator," but we are, okay? And, like, it starts
Yeah.
young, and it starts where it makes sense, I like to use the example of, like, I have a two-and-a-half-year-old grandson, and that's through adoption, I'm not that old, but I have a two-and-a-half-year-old grandson, and he's at that age where he is just sometimes he is a mess, for no reason other than he's 2.5 years old, right? And so there's times where we are very manipulative and trying to get him to, like, not scream in the restaurant, for
Yeah.
for everybody else's sake, not even just for our sake. And so you start doing these things where you're kind of like tweaking their environment so that, this 2.5-year-old doesn't feel what he feels. And then, you realize that later on down the road, like, am I still doing those manipulative things where instead of like actually letting my child maybe feel this disappointment, which I could guide them through, or
Mhm.
to feel this, this sadness or this anger or, the quote unquote negative feelings. Am I actually like manipulating them out of those moments that could produce that growth that we all need?
Mm.
And, I think sometimes we as parents, we don't realize we're like some of the biggest manipulators and we think we're doing good. And I think there are times it's like, if they need to go to school, it's probably not the best time to drop something on them. I don't want someone doing that with me if I have something important right
Right.
before, right? So that's understandable. But I think there is that balance of like making sure you're really giving them like the moments to grow instead of being like, oh no, let me protect them from this and and then sometimes I think we're really just protecting ourselves, let's be real. Like, I don't wanna deal with that right now, but, I can admit that.
Yeah, and I think that's, like, really good introspection because, and it shows, like, you're on this healing journey, like, you're on the
Mhm,
highway. Because I did the same thing, and I completely agree with you. There have been times where, I'm so overwhelmed, and I'll go back to my kids, and I'm like, "That was it was kinda manipulative
mhm,
in
yeah,
the way
yeah,
that I did that." Like,
mhm,
and I have to go tell them, and I use those words because 'cause I'm like, "I don't want you thinking that that was okay."
yeah, it's so good.
But it is, like, as parents, we can do our best, and, if I'm super stressed or overwhelmed, I make sure that I'm like, "I'm not upset or overwhelmed with you,
Yeah,
like, I'm just a working single mom in the summer, and you guys are
yeah,
home, and
mhm,
I'm juggling more, and it's not you. I love
yeah,
you.
mhm,
Not you, it's the other stuff that I have going on that is in the mix."
yeah, yeah. That's so good, and I love that you apologize too. I think that's another answer to your question, right? If we're apologizing, or not apologizing, that sends some very big messages. To not apologize, is to say like, if I've done something wrong, I don't need to make it right. And that is gonna set them up for a whole lot of failure
Yeah.
in any relationship. But if they have that example of like what you were saying, you come to them, it even doesn't even have to be in the moment, right? Because we're all human. Sometimes in the
Right.
moment, that apology would probably be really fake, But when you come to them with that sincere apology and making them feel better, but also like the promise of like I'm gonna return that safety to you, I think it speaks volumes. And I think I kind of go back and forth. I'm like, we are setting them up for success in a lot of different kinds of relationships when we do that. But I also think, and this is not just even to plug my book, but I had a very good parent who did a lot of those things. And it didn't necessarily mean that I brought that into a romantic relationship. So when we can, I think we have to put those in the context of like once they're older, making sure like, okay, this is what it looked like when you were this age. This is what it looked like when you were this age. But now, you're approaching, depending on where they are in life, 11, 12,
Yeah.
and up, right? Because they have my daughter told me in 6th grade there were some kids that were 100% like booed up, and I was like 100%, and she's like 100%. So
Wow.
exactly right. So you never know when those things will start happening. But I do think we all need it within a specific context as well, right? And
Yeah.
that's what I love, about like the fact that consent comics is stories because what you're doing and apologizing, what you're doing and, helping them to have like a voice and all of those different things and pausing, you really are just able to bring them out within the story. And you're
Yeah.
like, this is how we're acting as a family. This is how our relationship is. And it should be no different when you are in a romantic relationship because I think we see a lot of the different, unfortunately, like in the media. I remember, I mean, every teen goes through that phase where like we love our teen dramas, but they are some of the most like toxic relationships ever. I think I got the biggest, worst lesson from the teen dramas, which was, the bad boy who's trying to do right is the right person for you. Like, no, like it's not. He comes with
Yep.
a lot of baggage, and sometimes it really just means that you're gonna become a part of that, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of funny where it's, the lessons that they receive, they need to receive, like, the whole package from us, And depending on what that age is, that package looks a little different.
Yeah. And I love the consent comics because it can become like a routine in your day. So,
Mhm.
what I like to do with my kids is every night I still put them both to bed. And
Yeah.
that's the time where we talk about our day.
Mhm.
I'm religious, so we pray.
Yeah.
We talk about what we want to do tomorrow, like
Mhm.
the highlight of our day. We end up reading a little bit. And so that's just
Yeah.
kind of like, it's like our little family meeting for the night. It's like our
That's
one on
great.
one little check in
Mhm.
and, it doesn't have to be because I've had to have some serious conversations with my kids.
Yeah.
They're both boys, and to your point of, they're growing up through I'm like, "You have to be respectful, you have to do this,"
Mhm. Yeah.
and it's always such a very short conversation because they don't wanna have
Mhm.
it. They're
Yeah.
like, "I understand," but they're not necessarily at that phase yet.
Yeah.
They're like, "Okay, got it, mom. Like, here's why are you interrupting my time?" But
Yeah.
with something like consent comics, it's something that it's entertaining, and you can
Mhm.
kind of touch on the subject before they're ready,
Yeah.
while
Yeah.
not, like, being like, "I'm your mom," like,
Yes. Yeah.
So it makes me wonder, like, how can parents teach bodily autonomy without coming across as rude or disrespectful to relatives? Because I think that's
Yeah.
a huge part too where, sometimes, like, they don't wanna give a hug, and it's like, "Well,
Yeah.
that's customary," and you're like, "Is it though? Like, do
Mhm.
you?"
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. Depending on the culture, it's harder than some. I think, ultimately it depends on the relative whether or not they're really going to be offended or not, but I think we can do our best of explaining our why, And I mean, I mean, there are gonna be some relatives that get upset about this, but, I kinda say, like, what relative is gonna really be upset about saying you saying, like, "I'm trying to protect my child. I don't want them to get comfortable with uncomfortable touch," And I think that's kinda, like, one of the best ways that you can put it because when they think about it that way, I mean, guaranteed they have times where they can relate to that, times where they didn't want to be touched and that discomfort and just I think encouraging the relatives to realize too that, outside of, we have to, I like to think about this because I have a one of my other grandsons, I have 4 in general, so they might all come up in this
Yeah.
conversation, So, but my second oldest, he is autistic, and so the way that I approach him is very different than my other 3 grandsons who are like, "Grandma, grandma," and coming and running and, like, hugging me all the time, and sometimes maybe too much in my space. With my second oldest, he definitely has to, like I approach him and try and see where he is, and then I almost always ask him, like, "Xander, can I have a hug? Can grandma have a hug? Do you wanna hug grandma?" Because,
Mm,
because he is, neurodivergent, it's a very different ballgame, I
yeah.
love it. I mean, absolutely love the things that he's taught me, and the approach that I have and just, like, our special relationship because of that, and so I think, parents who have, the kids that are on the spectrum for bravo if you are very upfront with your relatives about how they feel and how they should approach your child, So with in that sense, you might not end up with a child who later on down the road is all hugging you, and you need to be okay with that. I think most kids, if you give them that safety, they become quite a bit more affectionate with you in the times that
Mm,
they wanna be affectionate with you. I mean, that's kinda with people too, right? Like, I'm just
yeah,
realized I'm like, "That's me too, okay."
yeah,
If I feel really safe with someone, and they're my partner, I'm just like, "Oh, I want you. I want when I really want you, like, like, I absolutely want you because I feel safe with you." And so I think, when you have that relatives who pushes back, just encouraging them to understand, like, "Okay, we don't want these kids to become uncomfortable with, I mean, comfortable with uncomfortable touch." And then also, we need to see that when they're feeling safe, they're more likely to be, incredibly affectionate with you later on, and you don't want them to always be giving you like a hug that they don't want to give you anyway. It's going to feel much better when they want to give it to you. So yeah, I mean, I feel like all of those things I'm saying though, I'm like, gosh, I'm speaking to myself. So I almost want to like pause here and let you talk so I can like process.
yeah. No, it's so true, and we kinda talked about this
Yeah.
before we started recording where it's like, we talk about, we're talking more about, like, how consent comics goes is can be used for kids, but then what you just said,
Yeah.
like, I'm literally resonating in my head where, I've been at, like, social events
Mhm.
or not necessarily, like, with family, but
Yeah.
just been at social events, because my boyfriend is Mr. Socialite.
Okay.
So we're like he's always got something planned for us, and,
Yeah.
almost immediately, you can sense, like, when someone's the creepy uncle. Like,
Mm.
they've just, like,
Yeah.
touched your
Oh
arm or,
my
like, they
gosh,
touched your waist,
yes.
and
Yeah.
it's just, like, in casual, like, you don't feel the, like, stranger danger,
Mhm.
something's going to happen, like, my boyfriend's
Yeah.
there, we're at an event, but, like, the constant touching, you're just like, "Okay," like
Mhm.
and you just feel it, and
Yeah.
I've noticed myself, like, I'll be at an event, and I'm like, You're damn sure I'm going to, like, be as far away from you as possible for
Yeah.
the rest of the
Yeah.
night." And, like, that's probably what kids are feeling too, when they're,
Yeah.
like, not wanting to be touched or,
Mhm.
I remember, like, I had a grandma that was older, and,
Yeah.
like, it was just, like, odd to me, and I was like, "I don't want you like, touching me." I was like, I don't know."
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
she meant it fully out of love, but I was like, "I don't
Yeah.
want you, like, in my space." And,
Mhm.
so you get that kind of vibe from people,
Yeah,
and it could
exactly.
be completely innocent, it could
Mhm.
be something to be concerned about, but
Yeah.
at the same time, like, you have to like, as an adult, you can honor it and have the consent for it.
Yeah.
But, like, if I had my mom behind me, like, "No, you need to go talk to the creepy guy." Be like,
Mhm.
like,
Yeah.
"You're supposed to be protecting me," and, like,
Exactly.
honoring the fact that I think this person's weird.
Yeah.
So, it makes a lot of sense, like, thinking of it from someone who's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, however
Mhm.
old, and putting themselves in the same shoes that I've felt as an adult.
Right, right. I mean, you actually reminded me too of, church, growing up in church, and depending on what kind of church you're in, it can be like a hugging church, and how uncomfortable that can be, and it's just kind of like, it's under obviously this, religious teaching of, that you're supposed to, like, be hugging each other and loving each other, and you're all brothers and sisters, right?
Mhm.
But you're not really in the sense of, like, how comfortable you are with each other physically.
Yeah.
And so it can and I remember in being in church when I was a kid and, one of my parents was like, "Go give him a hug, Tiffany," and it was like this grown man, right? And it's like they weren't thinking about that because that was like the norm in the church, but I remember I like still to this day remember being uncomfortable and
Wow.
just being like, "Oh, okay,"
Yeah.
And it's like the man was not creepy or anything like that, but I was not comfortable giving that man a hug. And,
Yeah.
I think wherever we are, sometimes because of whatever like the norms are, we just don't think about that. And do I always, ask my kids for a hug? No. But I make it very clear to them that like they don't have to accept a hug when they don't want to,
Mm.
and that can even be when they're just in a bad mood. I'm
Right.
like, and that's usually what if I feel that I'm like, "Can I give you a hug? Do you want a hug?" And they're like, "No, I don't want a hug." I'm like, "Okay, fine." But, it's but just
I
even in those little times where it's like our norms can really kind of mess up like our kids in terms of like them feeling obligated to get provide physical touch, and you just don't want them to feel obligated in any way. So yeah, we really have to be careful with that.
Yeah, it's very obvious because these things could your mom in church was probably, like, super, like, innocent, maybe didn't even think twice about it. She might have
Yeah.
been talking to somebody else and was like, "Oh, go give
Yes,
this
yeah.
person a hug," and, like,
Right.
it's almost like compounding your whole life at that moment where you're like, "I don't want
Mhm.
to," like, I
Yeah.
like, that feeling. It's like a deep weighted feeling where you're like you kinda feel icky, like, you're just like, "I
Yeah.
don't wanna do it."
Mhm.
And, so what are some ways that consent comics, like, helps kids or anybody understand those feelings and then be
Yeah.
able to act on them respectfully?
Yeah. I think and I can say this just from my journey with the comics because here's the thing, like, I made them for prevention, and then I found a lot of my own healing within them. And I didn't expect that at all. I always feel silly kinda saying like, "Oh, comics helped me heal." Who else is saying that? Please point me to them because then I won't feel so, alone in this. Although a lot of other people have talked to me at this point and talked about like, the healing that they've gotten from it as well. But I just like for me, it was so important to see an example over and over again of someone having their boundary and upholding it. So the thing is, with consent comics, I tell each story, except for one, in three different ways. And so it's the person has a boundary and the other person doesn't want to respect it. But that person still holds their boundary and says, okay, you're being whack. I'm going to leave. You need to leave. All the things that might happen with something like that. And I tried to make it the least triggering as possible because
Mhm,
I'm a survivor. Like, I understand that you don't want to see assault. I don't want to see it either. I still have
mhm.
some days where I kinda just need a break from, like, sex scenes as well, right? So,
Yeah,
depending on where you are, it's just like I wanted to make sure that, like, everybody could take this in and it could be, like, the least triggering as possible. So, you're not gonna see anything like that even in someone disrespecting. It's, like, the approach of disrespecting rather than, them, like, pushing or something like that, or,
okay.
like, whatever it might be. So, you have that version, and then you have a version in between where it's called Apologies Matter, and that's where the person has the boundary. The other person starts pressuring, and that pressure can look like, "Oh, but I miss you," right? That's that's a form of pressure.
Mm,
Uh, or it could be like, "Come on, like, why wouldn't you wanna do this? Other people are doing it. But I really wanted to, like, have this between us." Whatever it might be, that person thankfully realizes, "Oh my gosh, this is not the best response. What am I thinking? I'm making my partner or whoever it is on the other side, like, feel unsafe and unheard and unseen, like we talked about."
yeah.
And so they apologize, and it's a wonderful apology full of, change right now and change for the future. And so you have that, and then you have the other one where the person has the boundary and it's respected right away, and that's called a better way. Because a better way, I had it before where it was like done right, but I was like, that's too like finite. That's like one way to do it right. And that's what I don't love about a lot of other like consent teaching is it's like do's and don'ts, and this is how if this happens, you do this, and it's just like I mean I am not it's almost like you're gonna take the SAT again, you know what I mean? Where you're like, "Oh my gosh, I better get the answer just right, exact and remember it exactly as they just told me," rather than, just knowing in that moment, like, "Okay, I want this person to feel seen and heard and respected and overall valued." I always talk about consent as being, you valuing people. And so, like, in the end, what I did there is you have 3 stories, and no matter what the other person is doing, you have someone that says, "I have a boundary and I'm going to stick to it." And in seeing that over and over again, it was like I was seeing it as a lot more simple. I was like, "Oh, okay, so, if this happened, I could do this." Not that I'm ever gonna be, like, perfect in that, and like I
Right.
said before, the responsibility is always on that other person to make sure that you actually wanna do it. But I did instill within myself a lot of confidence that I didn't have before because in my survivor journey, I definitely blamed myself, from the
Yeah.
start. As many people do, you have so much blame and shame, and you're just like, how could I have let this happen to me?
Mhm.
And so, I really what I did was I like, I didn't love myself and I thankfully found that I loved myself, but then I still didn't trust myself. And that's a thing that takes more time. And I feel like with the comics, I gained that trust back because I suddenly felt the confidence that I needed to say, okay, if this situation happened, I think I will be able to uphold my boundary, but also, even more so, if this situation happens, I will recognize when someone's pressuring me and when someone's trying to manipulate me or coerce me or whatever it
Ooh.
might be, and that I'm going to recognize that red flag in them and know that that's not the type of person that I want to be with because I've also now seen this example of when someone has a boundary, what it looks like to be really cared about more than what you could like possibly do for someone.
I really, really enjoy that, and I think what is the middle version of the story? There's
The
the better
apologies matter.
the apologies matter. I really
Yeah.
like that approach that you take because I think too, we're kind of in this culture where, we have our parents that did the best that
Mhm.
they could
Yeah.
with the stuff that they had,
Yeah.
and then, the stuff they got from their parents, which was like, very militant almost. And then
Mhm.
we have, we're kind of on this journey of, the setting of the boundaries and,
Yeah.
almost like bodily autonomy and being
Yeah.
like, no, I am my own person. I don't have to be like a child that's seen but not heard.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so we're kind of, I feel like a lot of us are going through that. Maybe it's the millennials and the
Mhm.
Gen Z is kinda like, "Well, we're all just" they're free as birds can be, but
Right, right.
I like the apologies matter because it shows both sides,
Yeah.
and I think sometimes people based off of, like, if they're, like, more of an anxious attacher or,
Mhm.
they are using, like, rom-coms as their, like, guiding light or whatever it might
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
they they can be manipulative, and
Mhm.
they don't necessarily that's not their reasoning or their
Yeah.
end goal.
Exactly.
But they're so, like, anxiously attached to you, and what they're saying is true,
Mhm.
but I like that it gives the duality of both sides because,
Yeah.
for the person that's being more manipulative, they could then see that and say, "Oh, I'm
Yeah.
actually being a little manipulative in saying that, and I should
Mhm.
uphold the boundary."
Right.
Because, like, the rom-coms, they're it's like, "Oh, just do it," and the peer pressure is
Mhm.
kinda cute, and, it's like, "He really likes me, he's pursuing me," and it's like,
Yeah.
"No, your boundary is your boundary. You need to respect that boundary."
Mhm. Yeah, no, I love that. I'm so glad that you brought that up because that was something that was really important to me. The way I wrote the stories at the beginning is I had a bunch of the first version of like not respecting the boundary. And so I was writing them and I have my really wonderful illustrator. And I think we were like 5 or so in. And I was like, okay, wait, Addie, like, we are missing something really big here because even though we're showing people how to stick with their boundary, hooray, we are not showing people how to respect a boundary. And so what
Mm,
we then did is I started writing the other version, which was like a better way where it showed the person respecting that boundary. Now, for me at that time, honestly, it was complete like fairy tale and like writing fiction because that had not been my experience at that point, right? So I'm just like, what would I have wanted
mm,
that person to say to me, and I did eventually have like I have a bunch of experts that before the comics went in the book, I had psychologists and, male education specialists even and different people who looked them over to say like, hey, why don't we say it like this or whatever. And so, it's not even all just me within it.
mhm.
But yeah, it's I wanted people to say like, "Okay, this is how you respect a boundary, and this is what it can look like." Thankfully, now I have an amazing partner who is literally like my better way,
Oh,
and it's
good.
awesome, and, eventually I started writing, like, the later versions where it was like, "Okay, what do I feel like Sam would say to me in that moment?" So that's really
Yeah.
wonderful, and then, so I had the 2 different versions, but, like, clearly there was something missing in the middle. And I realized that because I said to Addie, I was like, rarely do people go from like one to the other. It is a journey, right?
Mhm.
Even in like we're talking about with parenting our kids, like it's a journey to get to where we want to be as parents, and that journey requires, like you brought up, those apologies along the way. And so I wanted to give people what I felt like was just a more realistic view of consent and healthy relationships instead of just going from like straight from like, okay, this is what you don't do and this is what you do because we're going to have so many moments where we don't realize what we're doing right in that moment, and we're going to have to like recognize it, before it gets to harm because I made sure you never get to like the harm that can
Right,
be done
right.
with it. But before it gets to harm, like can you realize it and then truly make that like apology and make things right. And so, to me it's just like it makes sense to have that there in any kind of teaching in any kind of relationship teaching because no one's perfect. Like I'm
Mhm.
not perfect, you're not perfect. Like if someone's perfect, I mean honestly they're going to creep me out. So, it's no one's perfect and I love that about us. So like let's just all learn together and admit that we are learning.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so great, and I know that you sent me like, a copy of it,
Mhm.
and one's coming like, I get a physical copy too, but
Yeah.
where can people get get the comic book?
Yeah, so it's available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, and bookshop.org. It's easy to look up Consent Comics. You can also just go on consentcomics.com, and we have, like, an order now button, and it'll show you, like, the different places that you can get it from. And then, yeah, so there's an ebook, the paperback. I do recommend the paperback only because especially if you're gonna go through it with kids or even yourself, there's just something about being able to, like, pause and highlight or whatever it might be. I was reading through it the other day, and I was like, "Ooh, that sentence just hit me." You know what I mean? And so, like, it
Yeah.
it it happens with a lot of people where, they just really you almost kinda need that physical copy to be like, "Okay, I'm gonna, like, star that little thing right there." And so, yeah, it's available, like, usually wherever books are sold, and, yeah, it's one of those things where, I get excited because, if you purchase it, please let me know, what you got from it because it's always surprising me what people are getting from it. I had a 48-year-old man tell me that reading it had him rethink a whole situation that happened between him and his wife and his boundaries, her pushing, things like that, her ask, but not really an ask. And things and I was just like, "Wait, you mean like I like these comics just affected your marriage?" And he's like, "Yeah, and like now we're going to like discuss kind of how we can better like, go about that next time." And I'm like, "That's just crazy." Like that's really crazy to me that, even at that point like it's still affecting
Yeah.
people in relationships.
Wow, and I'm gonna second you on that, that you should definitely get the hard copy, the paperback,
Mhm.
because it just becomes a good like, it's always gonna be there, it doesn't get lost in your emails or your
Yeah.
files or on your phone somewhere, and if you're reading it with your kids, it's just something that you can start doing before bed,
Yeah,
or,
exactly.
like, when you wake up, just as, like, a little simple reminder for the day
Yeah.
where it's like you have consent and giving them that ability before the situation happens, I think is
Yes,
the
exactly.
biggest moment is like, I think as parents, we wanna give them the tools in their toolkit before they actually need them
Yeah.
so that they're not in that kind of regret moment
Mhm.
or, they're having to deal with, like, the PTSD that you're going through or,
Yeah.
that many other people have gone through. It's like, if you would have just had that in your back pocket,
Mhm.
I think is super valuable.
Yeah, for sure. I think and I actually have sometimes I forget to say this, I have a discussion kit, like a conversation kit online for parents. If you want some different questions and things that you can do along the way within, and it goes through each story, has some different things that you can point out and talk through. And I do it in a fun way where, it's like you can summarize the story, but you can also do it like act like you're one of the characters and say like what happened, right? So
Oh, fun.
yeah, and then I was like, that was just me teaching, and I was like, "Okay, how can I make this even more engaging between families?" And so you're able to use that. I even encourage you because I will be going through this with my kids this summer now that it is published. And one of the things I encourage you to do is like even get some of their favorite snacks and say, "Let's go through a couple stories together here and, talk these out," right? So like you can make them into like these just even like fun times where it's like, "Oh, it's an activity. I even like I'm gonna let my kids like grade my answers even from a one scale of 1 to 10, because
Okay.
like I will not, if they want me to like throw that shade back at them, I will. But kids love, especially teenagers, they love some
Uh-huh.
free shade toward their parents. And so I'm gonna allow my kids, my younger ones, to say like, "No, mom, you should have said it like this. That would have been much better." But there's a lot of things within it just even to go through. I One of the things I feel like I want to bring up because I think a lot of people, like as I'm talking about like you're upholding a boundary, I want to give voice to those people who didn't feel comfortable or strong enough to speak up.
Mhm.
And I want you to realize that there were probably a lot of ways that you were speaking up that just weren't respected in those moments. And I actually have like a resource in the book, which is really important to me. It's called, I'm going to show it here, Different Ways People Say No. And it is verbal and nonverbal, right? And so there are CEOs of billion-dollar companies who can speak on stage, and then they have that relationship with that parent where they're silent. And so
Mhm.
it's never a matter of, like, how strong you are, and, just realize that, like, we all, like, struggle at times with physically saying no, but
Mhm.
when someone really cares about you, they will make sure that you are truly giving a yes before they do anything.
Mm. That's great. I wanna, like, earmark that page. 'Cause there's obvious you see that there's ways to say no. Like,
Right.
you can sense it, but to actually see it on a piece of paper and be like, "There is more than one way."
Yeah, yeah, and really that's just like, recognizing that, and this is something we need to teach our kids, right? When someone says, "I don't know," that's a no. When someone
Mhm.
says, "Maybe," that's a no,
Mhm.
Like, when someone fidgets, that's a no, When someone looks at
Mhm.
their phone, we're really good at looking down at our phones when we're trying to avoid something these days, right? So,
Yep.
when someone looks down at their phone, that's a no, when they pause or hesitate or they say, So that's really, like, what I wanted to get across because nonverbal language and verbal language that's not exactly, a specific word is that's nothing new. There's
Yeah.
movies where I remember watching, like, I think it was The Bourne Identity. It's old school, but I love it, and with Matt
Yeah.
Damon,
Yeah.
so just one of my favorite movies. But I noticed in there after I was doing some work, there was literally a back and forth between 2 characters, and it was, like, 2 men, and they're, like one's, like, looking at him, and the other guy's like, "Okay, for real?" And he's like, "Mhm," and but there's no words, and it's, like, the moment where the main guy is like, "We're gonna go ahead and get, like, Matt Damon's character killed." Right?
Yep.
And the guy's like, "Okay, I'm gonna, like, call up the really bad guy." But it
Yeah.
was like there was no words, right? And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Okay, can we stop acting like nonverbal communication is something new when it comes to like, oh, but they didn't say no?" There
Right.
is so much communication outside of, like, what we say,
Right.
and it's all in what we do, and, like, I just really wanna, like, validate that for people who, later on, even after you read consent comics and you go through therapy, there's still gonna be times where you're just like, gosh, I thought I had it, but like just like
Yeah.
we were talking about, nobody's perfect. And can only hope and pray that you're around people that care about your yes and want that, what I call your empowered yes. And if you are not, it is never your fault. It's never your fault.
I absolutely love that. Like, okay, so what is one last piece of advice that
Mhm.
you could give every parent listening for raising a self-advocating kid?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that you can do, outside of what we talked about is truly to be there for them. We can self advocate all we want, but we always need support outside of that at different times. And so I always try to make it very clear with all of my kids that I don't have to agree with you to love and support you in that moment. It does not matter what you are doing. I'm going to be there for you. You are never going to have to choose between telling me something and me, abandoning you, right? Like that there's no choice in that. Like you can always tell me something and I will be there for you. And, I truly believe that I'm put on this planet not to be yeah, I'm trying to be your guide. I don't need to like control you in any way for me to love you. And I think when kids know that, like I always say to my daughter, like we're having these conversations now, but I hope that even if you're making mistakes in college and you need some support and some help, like you can call me up, and thankfully she's seen it with my oldest adopted daughters. I didn't like this person they were with, right? They knew it, but we were still on the phone once a week talking with each other. And of course, when everything went down, I wasn't there to say, I told you so. I was there to say, what do you need? You know?
Mm,
And so I think that's the biggest thing that we can do is like, we can instill all the confidence that we want in them, but they're going to need us, and we want them to know that we'll be there for a lifetime.
yeah, that's so beautiful. It gave me the chills because
Yeah.
it's true. It's like that's what you want. You'd hope you'd want
Mhm.
kids.
Yeah.
It's when I envision my life when my kids are older and like the kind of mom and the kind of family that we have,
Yeah.
it's, because boys eventually leave and they
Mhm.
make their own families and have their own lives and
Yeah.
work and everything. But I could only hope that, they're telling me their exciting things, their sad
Yeah.
things. They're,
Yep.
they're just communicating with me like, I'm upset about this or this happened. I hope
Yeah.
that I'm the phone call on their drive home
Mhm.
or that their family wants to vacation with me when
Yeah.
they're older. I
Right.
want it as much as I know they're going to go away, I want to be like their anchor in life
Yeah.
and not
Yeah.
be like, "Oh, I told you so," or "You should have listened," or, it's like
Exactly.
just giving them the support and knowing early on that they have that support.
Yeah, yeah, and I think when we want to do it, it's gonna happen, It's because 'cause you're
Yeah.
gonna do everything you can just for it to be like, "Okay, okay, like, I'm here for you, whatever you need, whenever you need it," and I think, when they have that anchor in you, it's just like that's gonna make them even stronger, and I mean, so many relationships isolate people, right? So, the closer we can stay with them no matter what, like, I think the better off a kid is, as long as we're doing our work too, right, to heal.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, well, thank you, Tiffany, so much for joining us today and the incredible work you're doing through Consent Comics. As a mom, this conversation was a powerful reminder that teaching our children about boundaries, communication, and trusting their voice isn't just to protect them, it's to empower them to build healthy relationships and navigate their world with confidence. So, if you'd like to learn more about Tiffany's work, access additional resources, or explore Consent Comics for yourself, be sure to visit consentcomics.com and follow Tiffany online at I am Tiffany Braxton. If you have enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this conversation with a parent, educator, or friend who could benefit from hearing about it. And we'll see you next time. And that's a wrap on today's episode of Love in the Wild. If you laughed, nodded, cried, or texted your bestie mid-episode, you already know the drill. Don't keep it to yourself. Leave a review, share it in your stories, and tag me at Katelyn so I can hype you up right back. Remember, healing isn't linear, dating isn't a sport, and you're doing better than you think. Be soft, stay unbreakable, and I'll see you next week.